Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel Making Blended Finance Work for Scaling Impact in Climate Smart Agriculture and Health. I'm excited to be your moderator for this session. My name is Zulu-Hume, a sustainable finance specialist at CGIAR, where we work to catalyze investment to the agriculture sector in emerging markets, including Zambia. I have a background in impact investment, venture capital, and angel investment across the African continent. And joining me today is a group of experts from various organizations. Let's begin by them introducing themselves and their organizations. I'll hand over first to the panelists on the stage. Namaya, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Mercy. My name is Namaya Mbikusita-Lewanika, and I represent here an organization called Prospero Zambia, where I work as the investment services sector lead. And I think during the day, you might have heard the name Prospero a couple of times, but basically what Prospero is a private sector development company that works in a couple of key sectors, including food and agriculture, tourism, industry and manufacturing, as well as some work around business services and investment services. I, of course, focus around investment services, which is the portfolio that I happen to lead. In addition to that, we provide a lot of support through grants and technical assistance, as well as investment readiness support and investment facilitation support, as well as more recently this year, direct investments through debt in the form of concessional debt facilities and also the International Climate Fund we've recently established. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carl Jensen. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Good Nature Agro. We are a social enterprise, an agricultural company for profit, but with the mission to work with smallholder farmers to move out of poverty and into the middle class. We do that by supporting smallholder farmers across their entire farm. We finance farmers. We provide training, we provide ready market offtake, and our primary business is as a legume seed company. So we produce seed for soy, groundnuts, beans, other legumes with 4,600 smallholders. A couple years ago, we realized that our growth could not be sustained unless we extended our model and found creative ways to engage more farmers in a larger piece of the value chain, which is on commodities. So we started working with customers of our seed through the same packages of financing, training, and market access. And we now engage about 25,000 smallholder farmers in Zambia and Malawi. We've been fortunate enough to receive grants from a number of institutions over the years. From back when we had about 40 farmers we were engaging and just working out of a single office/home in Chipata, as well as closing quite a bit of grant and equity funding. So I'm here to talk from our experience on raising blended finance.
Fantastic. We're going to turn over to the virtual panelists. I'm going to start with Ashish. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Ashish. I'm a sustainable finance specialist at CGIAR. At CGIAR, our main role is to scale innovations using innovative financing instruments. I have previously worked with a consulting firm where I helped set up impact funds, mostly blended finance funds. And within CGIAR, we have also recently helped an impact investor raise a food systems fund, which is also a blended finance fund. And we're also working with them to help them to a technical assistance facility. So really excited to be here and to be a part of this panel.
Thanks, Ashish. Emilian?
Yeah, hi, I'm Emilian. I'm the CEO and founder of a healthcare company called Ilara Health. I also have a background in venture capital, having built and run a growth stage tech-enabled fund, investing across the continent for 4 years. But specifically in healthcare, so at Ilara Health, we're consolidating Africa's hyper-fragmented primary care ecosystem using technology. We started Ilara Health in 2019 by bringing essential diagnostic devices to those many and small peri-urban primary care medical facilities that we all see around the big cities in Africa. But in order to drive their growth and improve the patient care those small medical facilities can deliver. So we've been acting in Kenya, but have launched a small pilot in South Africa recently. And the goal is to take this pilot to the next level. So since early 2019, we've leased and financed one or more diagnostic devices, connected diagnostic devices, to about 800 of those small clinics in Kenya, to about 10,000 private small medical practices, and another 10,000 public dispensaries. We've digitized over 150 of those 800 clinics through our operating system. And we're now getting much deeper into the care provision of those clinics, including the membership or insurance model. And we expand to more facilities with those connected devices.
Thank you, Emilian. And finally, Jari, Matero, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mercy. Good afternoon. My name is Jari Matero. I'm the head of agriculture and forestry portfolio at Finnfund. And greetings from Helsinki. I see snow outside, so I wish I could be there physically. Zambia is actually one of my favorite countries in Africa. So unfortunately, this time it will be virtual. But anyway, thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. And basically, I represent Finnfund, and Finnfund is the Finnish development finance institution. It's owned by the government, and we invest in private companies in developing countries. And agriculture and forestry are two of our focus sectors, but we do investments in various sectors. And the investment amount varies between $1 and $25 million per transaction. We have a total portfolio and commitments about 1 billion euros, and half of that it's actually sub-Saharan Africa. So Africa is really important for us. And regarding Zambia, we review maybe 10 to 15 agribusiness transactions per year. So far, we have done one direct investment. So that's aquaculture company Yalelo, in which we invested in 2019. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourself. So good food is a cornerstone of good health, and health and well-being are central to sustainable food systems. However, despite public and donor funding, both sectors remain grossly underfunded. According to the Food and Land Coalition, there's about 300 to 350 billion US dollars of investment capital that is required annually up to 2030 to transition our food and land systems into sustainable systems. Likewise, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa reports that Africa's health sector has a 66 billion annual financing gap. So both these sectors require a lot of private sector investment to boost productivity and stimulate socio-economic growth. However, investment by the private sector has been heavily lagging due to perceptions of high risk and inability to assess and manage this risk. One solution is blended finance, and that's what we're here today to talk about. Drawing on the experience of the panelists, this session will explore opportunities and challenges for using this approach in unlocking private capital for Zambia's sustainable and health sectors. I'd like to kick off by directing the first question to Namaya. Prospero is a very active market enabler in the Zambian ecosystem. You mentioned, building pipeline, providing business capacity services to SMEs and startups, as well as policy development. Let's start by painting the agriculture and health landscapes in Zambia. Can you take us through what opportunities they are in these sectors and what kind of financing is available for these type of solutions and opportunities, and where the challenges are?
Thank you very much, Mercy. So like you said, Prospero has been working in this space for quite a number of years now. Since 2014 to be exact, when we're PEPS Zambia. And we've obviously worked with a number of companies that are both in the agriculture space as well as the health space. And there are many opportunities, but maybe before I talk about the opportunities, I would also like to highlight some of the major challenges that are specific to these two areas. And one of the major challenges, of course, is the quality and size of businesses. Oftentimes, you will find a direct disconnect with the investment that is available for areas like climate smart agriculture or health, or a combination of both. And I think that presents a challenge in itself, because many of the companies that we have identified and worked with are on the smaller end of things, and therefore oftentimes don't qualify for this type of financing. With that being said, with the growing call around climate, and just with the past COP26, there's a growing interest in the area of climate, especially climate smart agriculture, and which is a really great thing and creates opportunities. There have been a couple of funds that have been available, specifically focusing and targeting in this particular sector, which is a great thing. I'm also aware of more recently the intention, for instance, to establish Zambia's first green outcome fund, and that's through a collaborative effort between Kukula, WWF, and Zanaco, which is a great collaboration of different types of institutions coming together in order to solve a problem that exists. Even as Prospero, for instance, in the climate space, I did mention in my introduction, for instance, we have launched this year a fund that's specifically focused around climate, which is the International Climate Finance Fund. And obviously, because of the very nature of the fund, a lot of the businesses that are attracted to this fund are within the sustainable agriculture space, which I think creates great opportunities. And I think the real opportunity for us and all stakeholders within the ecosystem is, how do we really help businesses so that they can be able to access this type of funding that's available? But also, how do we develop solutions that can help businesses that might not be necessarily at that point where they require huge amounts of money that these funds typically would want to invest. And I think there's great opportunity for us to continue to work in this space. As Prospero, we are working in this space, but it obviously has to be a deep collaborative effort.
Thanks, Namaya. Good points raised there. You know, plenty of businesses, but most of them early stage type of businesses that do not have access to that kind of funding, the big ticket sizes kind of funding. And Namaya also raised the point that, you know, these businesses need support. And so I'm going to move to Ashish briefly to build up on the conversation. Given your experience in fund structuring and your current work at CGIAR designing blended finance structures for the agriculture sector, can we start from the basics? I'm sure some people in the audience who are hearing this term for the first time, blended finance. Others have heard it before, not quite knowing, you know, the particulars of it, and others are experts in the field. So can you please take us back to the basics and please explain this concept for us, why it's so crucial to achieving sustainable development in these sectors that we've mentioned, including some of the points that Namaya raised. Can it be a viable solution to address where there is the biggest demand for capital at the early stage business level?
Sure, thanks, Mercy. Yeah, let's start with the basics then. So what is blended finance? As the name suggests, it's a blend where you have many different type of financiers coming together to fund a project. Typically, it's public or philanthropic sources that provide these capital to catalyze private sector investments for a project or for geography that is deemed too risky by the investors. So essentially, it's a structuring approach that allows organizations with different objectives. You might have a donor that has an objective of creating an impact, for example, but you also have a commercial investor that wants to have a financial return as well. So a blended finance approach brings all these investors or these stakeholders together to invest in a project that might otherwise be deemed too risky for the private investors. So blended finance really helps catalyze private investments into different projects. Why it is crucial for sustainable development, because as you mentioned in your introduction, the huge funding gap and the lack of private investments in some of the sectors, especially in the agri sector, which is perceived to be too risky by these investors. How do you bring these investors into the foray, and how do you ensure that these investors stay? So blended finance is not by any means an end, and you say that okay, you have blended finance and that's it. But it's more like a transitory approach where you bring in these private investors to these geographies, to these regions, to these sectors. They build their expertise, they get familiarized with the sectors, and then they are by themselves can invest. So they don't need blended finance anymore. So blended finance is more like catalyzing, attracting these private investments into these sectors, and hoping that these private investors can then invest themselves without the support of any additional grant funding or donor support.
Thanks, Ashish. Just following up on your statement, you said that one of the key things, and I said as well in the introduction, is the ability to assess and manage risk, which is a very big issue in sectors such as agriculture that kind of makes investors feel a bit uncomfortable in dipping their toes in the sector. How does this approach minimize that risk? Yeah, there are many different risks. For example, when we speak about the financial risks, for example, a blended finance approach could be that there's one form of blended finance approach where a donor provides a concessional debt or equity in the capital stack of a fund or an investment company. So when an investor sees that there's a first loss sort of guarantee by a donor, and if that particular fund or company makes any kind of loss, that would be absorbed by the donor. So it gives a comfort for a private investor, so that their risk return profile remains as they want it to be. So that attracts the private investors to participate in the transaction. So that's one way that blended finance can help reduce the transaction risk. There are other risks, for example, when we say that the pipeline, there's no pipeline, or the companies are not at a stage where they're investable just yet. So technical assistance that can be raised by donor funding can help these companies come to a stage where they are investable through non-financial support, through business support, through accounting support, through impact measurement and management support. So when you bring these companies to a level where these private investors see that now they're investable, then they would be able to invest. And that's some of the mechanisms through which blended finance can help reduce the risk for these kind of investors, or for private investors per se. Thank you very much. Moving over to one such private investor, impact investor, Jari Matero. From what has been explained so far, it seems that blended finance is about bringing together different funders and capital providers with different mindsets to achieve a common goal. So you have the concessional providers, grant providers, you have more commercial type investors. Naturally, their individual motives will differ, but with the right kind of structure, a win-win situation can be created. Representing that private investor perspective, how do you create this win-win situation where you as a private investor are looking for both impact, social environmental impact, but also achieving your financial return?
Yes, so basically maybe just to continue what Ashish elaborated. So basically the way I understand the win-win situation through blended finance is that, and like Ashish mentioned, agriculture is really perceived really risky, especially primary production, and many financiers and investors they shy away from the sector in certain project types. And I think the underlying reason for that is that there are externalities that affect the return expectation of the investors, and basically increase the perceived risk. And blended finance is the means through structuring or financial engineering to reduce those risks and therefore increase the supply of funds to the sector, for example, agriculture. And it's really interesting because through blended finance, the increased supply of investments, for example, in agriculture, it will create a more dynamic and larger ecosystem that actually in turn reduce the effect of externalities. So, for example, in agriculture, you through the increased investments, there will be additional infrastructure investments, additional service providers, third-party service providers that basically create the ecosystem, and that by itself actually reduces the risks of the investor. I think that's really in my opinion, one way how the win-win situation actually develops. But maybe there's one potential risk in blended finance, and one needs to be careful that some of the private investors, they may actually see that the blended finance, maybe, for example, through grants or technical assistance, it may reduce the skin in the game of the founder of the business, so that there might be some investors that may consider blended finance as negative, but I think the overall picture is clear that there are many positive effects of blended finance, and in agriculture especially, it's really needed.
Thanks, Matero. You raised one point about having skin in the game by the founders with, crowding in too much grant financing. So I'm going to turn to one such founder and get the demand perspective, because we've been talking about the supply so far, but there are two sides to a transaction, two sides to the coin. And so, Carl, I'm going to focus this question to you. Good Nature Agro has previously closed $2.1 million in Series A fundraising in 2019. And you have had the experience of fundraising and engaging both local and international investors and financial institutions for grants, debt, and equity. From your experience, do you think there is appetite for blended financing from Zambian entrepreneurs? And would you consider the structure for your future fundraising rounds? This also goes back to the issue that Namaya raised about, more capital being directed towards early and growth stage businesses, because that's where there's a lot of challenges in the supply of capital.
Yeah, great question. There's a voracious appetite, definitely. Entrepreneurs are very, very keen on blended finance with good reason. And I think a major challenge in this space that's not talked about enough is just how desperate early stage entrepreneurs can be for money. And I'm talking of myself as well a couple years ago. And this leads to what I think is one of the biggest issues or misalignments, is when the entrepreneurs are willing to step out of the driver's seat or cede a bit too much direction to the grantors. And this happens more than you would think. Now, what leads to this, I think at the root cause, is grantors and the source of funds also have needs. Right? They have numbers they need to report on, they have key metrics, their money is coming from someone else. And so you end up with this system where growth is important to the grantors as well. But the best grants are actually targeted at these three adjectives up above us. Is it making your business more sustainable? Is it making it more inclusive? Is it making it greener? And the more that grants can focus on those three words and less so on growth, and then the blending comes in where debt and commercial sources can focus on the growth with the business, the more successful this approach will be. We've had instances where we've expanded into new districts because it was a precondition of a grant, and it was a mistake, but we took it because we needed the money. And we've also been extremely fortunate in other ways as well. Being American, this is a point I've made before, but I think it merits repeating. We had sources of capital that aren't available to Zambian entrepreneurs, like a friends and family round, available to some, but not all. Without that, we probably wouldn't have made it past the second or third year of Good Nature Agro. And that's another place where grants and blended capital, I think, has a larger role to play, as well as the commercials, if they're willing to take on a bit more risk. So I do think it's the right solution and the right system. We have the right tools moving around, but maybe a little bit of misalignment on how they're applied at the moment.
Thanks, Carl. And following up on that, since 2014, the Zambian kwacha has been in perpetual decline, with the last 2 years experiencing a particularly steep decline. This has presented, some currency risk for companies such as yourself and investors, especially when the company is not earning in hard currencies such as dollars. Do you think that blended finance can be used to reduce the risk?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that every business, no matter what scale, has certain levers that they can use to reduce the macro risks in the economy. For us, we were able to move a fair portion of our sales over to USD. But there are other levers as well, like Himet and Agro over here. One of the best groups I've ever seen at leveraging social media to get contracts and farmers engaged. That costs nothing, but it's persistence and drive of the founders to kind of reduce that risk of not having contracts in place. I think for blended finance to work in this environment, things like first loss guarantees are really important, but they're often hidden to the entrepreneurs. The number of first loss guarantees that are actually already out in this economy provided through banks would surprise probably everyone in this room, because the banks won't tell you that they're there. So we either need to have more direct engagement on those tools with the enterprises, so more direct investment or application, or the banks need to step up and be a little more transparent about what's behind the curtain. Because at the moment, it doesn't factor into more affordable pricing for the businesses.
Thank you so much. And we've shone a spotlight on agriculture quite a bit, and now moving on to the health sector. And Emilian, there's usually a private versus public sector dilemma when it comes to sectors such as health. Certain financial institutions argue that these sectors should remain exclusively funded by the public sector due to their general lack of expertise and experience, but others recognize that there's some niche areas and opportunities that they could engage in. Emilian, you have built a Kenyan health tech company that is expanding across Africa, and you have also recently closed, I think, about 3.7 million in fundraising last year. What would be your responses to the skeptics using Ilara Health as an example? Where are the opportunities for the private sector investors?
Absolutely, look, I think public health doesn't mean government healthcare, and I mean when we look at the pure government-funded healthcare systems, like where does it really work? I mean, Finland is probably one of the places where it does work, in Denmark, but if I look at my native Romania or native France, those systems don't work. The US doesn't work either. So public healthcare, I mean, I think publicly funded or government-funded healthcare works in countries where the government has the means and the knowledge and the funds to provide the services. But public care doesn't mean that the government needs to fund it. The government can put the rules in place, but the care can be provided by private healthcare organizations. When you look at most of the sub-Saharan African countries, in Kenya included, the care is half private, half public. Kenya has about 20,000 primary care. So I'm talking about the base of the care, primary care medical facilities, meaning facilities which have 10, 20 patients a day, 10,000 private, 10,000 public. So there is a clear opportunity, and same in the secondary, the tertiary, and the big hospital level, right? It's half private, half public. Now, The challenge in private primary care is it's extremely fragmented. I mean, 10,000 primary care facilities. I mean, take a country like UK, which has probably 5,000 to 6,000 doctors and maybe 1,000 hospitals. Kenya has 10,000 private primary care facilities, so way too many. All of them way too small. So, and there is an absence of groups to consolidate. So at Ilara Health, we consolidate this extremely fragmented primary care space by providing financing and assets to those small medical centers. In the same way, a venture capital fund is investing in the best entrepreneurs in the market, we invest in the best entrepreneurs running those small clinics. So we've been able to raise financing through this approach, which is the one of consolidation. So we start to have size. We are in about 10% of those primaries and about 1,000 of those small primary care facilities. So it starts to be sizable. And indeed, when you say, you know, the true healthcare has been for the past 50 years, has been seen as a public good and has been financed through grants and non-profit money, mostly focused on communicable diseases such as HIV, such as malaria. But when you look at the reality on the ground today, I look at our numbers here, diabetes and cardiac issues are actually bigger and growing much faster than HIV and malaria. We see 40 to 50% of the blood tests that we do, the results on diabetes markers, they are abnormal. Does it mean that half of the Kenyan population is diabetic? No, but it means that a massive chunk of it is pre-diabetic. So that's where the private care can play a massive role and can be financed by venture capital money, by DFI money, can be grants, can be debt. So we're currently raising, actually just closed a debt round, and there is DFI debt at a lower interest rate than the private venture capital money or the venture debt available in the market. So it's more patient capital, which can support private care.
Thank you, Emilian. So I'm seeing that there's an opportunity as well for blended finance here. I'm going to soon open up for questions for 10 minutes, leave 10 minutes for a round of questions from the audience. But I just wanted one round from everybody on the panel as we reflect on this topic. Where do we go from here? What needs to happen in the Zambian ecosystem for more blended finance to be directed towards agriculture and health projects? In maybe briefly, under 1 minute, can I get each of your perspectives on that?
Yeah, sure. So what are the next steps for us after this talking shop? I think the next steps really should be around a more collaborative effort. My sense is one of the reasons that blended finance opportunities are not happening as much is because there is a lack of collaboration generally. You find that a lot of us, Prospero included, that are working within the space to really help businesses to grow, operating in silos. So say, for example, there's a bank that has a good opportunity, but realizes they can't invest because there's some risk involved. That could easily be de-risked by partnering with a donor-based agency or a supported program. Those are the type of collaborations that need to be going forward, and vice versa. It's not just from the financial institution perspective, but also for the donor companies. If there are opportunities to see businesses like Good Nature in the early stage be able to leverage more commercial capital by de-risking some of the investment, then those are the things that we should be doing. But for that to happen, it means that we need to be talking to each other as institutions that can provide support for businesses.
Thanks, Namaya. Carl?
She stole my point. No, I think it's all about collaboration as well. And the more that grant capital can be focused at enabling tools and technologies that can be leveraged by multiple companies, the more efficient that money will be. So even if the grant flows to one company, one of the areas of focus, I believe, should be on how can this be applied to a lot more businesses, especially smaller businesses and businesses that are engaging hard to engage customers. so rural areas or particularly challenging problems. It came up a lot this morning around data being the key tool for the future, and I couldn't agree more. The more we can start moving away from physical assets as the preferred form of security or KYC towards better information, which not only shows that you have strong operations, but also that you understand your customers, the better off this space is going to be. So the more that people can focus on data and use that as an assessment tool for investments and for grants, and the more that they can help companies use data better, the stronger the space is going to be.
Thank you very much. Ashish?
Yes, from an agri point of view, I would suggest that we can help these companies by providing more technical assistance using blended finance, where these small agri companies can become more sustainable. They understand the risks better. They understand the climate smart solutions better. So I think if we can do that, I think it would be really good for the ecosystem.
Thanks, Ashish. Jari?
Well, my quick advice would be to establish something similar to what I have seen through Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund in Zambia. So basically, you could establish your own domestic fund, which would then provide grants and zero interest loans to local young and fast-growing agribusinesses. And that would be the fund that basically supports the companies to become eligible for commercial banks and international investors and so on. I think that I have been a great admirer of Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund and inter-market development work. So that could be something interesting in Zambia as well.
Thanks, Jari. And finally, Emilian.
Yeah, just really building on Yari's point. I strongly believe that those business models need to be profitable eventually. So I don't believe in free forever. Grant money needs to come and be injected for free, but with a condition that those businesses will eventually become profitable. DFI, low interest debt and long-term debt is provided. And we've raised both grants and DFI debt. Be provided because those businesses will eventually be able to raise money from commercial banks. So everything needs to eventually be profitable for this funding to work.
Great points. I mean, strong messages coming out with being more collaborative and not working in silos. So local institutions and international institutions coming together in order to see how they can best serve businesses in the Zambian businesses in the agri and health space. I guess that's why we're here today as the National Advisory Board for Impact Investing, organizing this summit to see how we can collaborate more. Also, a lot of strong messaging around using data. This also came up in earlier panels, and technical assistance to help bring businesses, to help de-risk and bring businesses where they should be in order to attract private capital. Jari raised the point of also unlocking local institutional capital, such as the Enterprise Challenge Fund. And I think we had discussed earlier in the sessions of seeing how we could unlock institutional capital from pension funds. And I think tomorrow some of the sessions will be looking at attracting specifically towards early stage companies. So I'd like to thank the panelists and open up for questions for the audience. Maybe if we can get one or two questions before wrapping up.
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting and helpful discussion. My question, I think, is more applicable to Carl. You raised a very interesting point where you mentioned the issue of, I think, both Prospero and you mentioned very good points. The first thing is that most institutions or most companies that seek for funding are either too small to handle the kind of funding that might come from different funders. And the other thing that you also mentioned is that from your end, it would have been almost impossible, I hope I'm not quoting you wrongly, to survive if you didn't have the funding that is coming from external funders, not local funders. So I would like to believe that a good number of local businesses fail because of lack of such opportunities. My question to you, because I think you are on a more practical base because you interact directly, I follow your work very well, you interact directly with small scale farmers. What would be your advice to businesses, small entrepreneurs, people that are thinking of funding? What would be your encouragement in terms of accessing finance, what they need to put in place if they are to survive in that climate smart and agricultural space, so to say?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thanks for following our work. I would say don't focus on scale until your unit economics, your engagement with each farmer is really tight and in your favor. I think something that we got too hung up on early in our business growth was the number of farmers that we were reaching. And that plus our revenue, those were our key drivers for several years. And it led to a business that was expanding, but without really focusing on, one, what the farmers needed or wanted. So we were kind of missing the impact mark. And two, what really matters to the investors down the line as well. Because they're not gonna focus on your revenue growth forever. Pretty soon it's going to move down the P&L. It's going to focus on your gross margin, then it's going to focus on your EBITDA, and then you'll have to worry about currency stuff, and it's going to focus on your net. And the earlier that as a business you can kind of hit that switch and focus on margin and then focus on EBITDA, the healthier you're going to be. And we were just having this discussion at lunch as well. There are a lot of sources of blended finance in Zambia, but the businesses also have to do their part and do the little things like get audited financials early. There are lots of cheap sources to engage accountants, but if you don't do that, when that opportunity comes, you're going to be scrambling. And yeah, we still scramble even as we're a little bit bigger now, but the more that you can prevent those barriers by just doing the little things early on, the better off you'll be.
I think my take is that we still require a lot more brains, I think, in structuring facilities that are fit for the realities, I think, on the ground in terms of the local SMEs. I think the issue of ticket size, I think, is a big one. I do understand, I think, the cost that goes into structuring some of these facilities. Hence, most of the providers of finance would love, larger ticket sizes. But again, most of the local SMEs sometimes require quite some very little, funding just to get going. And I think there's still a huge gap, I think, on that front in really structuring facilities that are fit for purpose. That I see as a huge gap. There's still an aspect of, some funders also, even on the impact, investment, stage, still asking for things like collateral. And then recently, I think we all know there's a facility that actually required, some of these SMEs to have turnover of 200,000 euros. What that actually means is that by design, you are actually excluding 99.9% of local SMEs. And we know who you are targeting when you're actually requiring someone to have turnover of 200,000 euros. So by design, you're actually excluding local SMEs. And I think there's also the issue that that gentleman talked about in terms of perception risk on local SMEs. I think you said, which is good, that you are honest that probably if you're not American, you do not access some of these other facilities. There's a lot of perception risk in terms of default on locals, but we have quite a lot of SMEs that actually have potential, but then bundled in this perception risk. So I think we have quite a lot of issues. And then the last point, I think, is on the matching grants. You again ask, some of these local SMEs to put in, say, 50%, matching grant. Again, technically, by design, you're actually excluding some of these local SMEs to participate in some of these, facilities. So for me, I think we also need to look at investing in preparatory facilities. These aspects of audit reports, standards, food safety and stuff like that, so that we up, the game and the standards of these SMEs so that they can actually, participate equitably on some of these platforms. Otherwise, so far, most of these impact investing, funds by design, they're actually excluding most of the local SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mercy, can I speak to that briefly?
Yes, please.
I think what you said at the very end is really important around preparatory facilities. And that's got to be the key, because we can't expect every investment or every facility to be the right fit for everyone. So yes, while some have floors, a minimum turnover, for example, just because that one's not the right fit doesn't mean that that should be the focus. We need a lot more emphasis on those earlier stage tools, especially in the blended finance space. So it's the technical assistance, but it's also the ticket size, because it's prohibitive. And the more that we can focus on that, the less an issue that it will be, because more of these challenge windows and things of that nature will come around. And our emphasis needs to be on getting the next generation of businesses ready for when that time comes. So, we've always tried to punch above our weight at Good Nature, and there's still several groups that we're way too small for, still way too small for most DFIs, the CDC, we can knock and knock and knock, it doesn't matter. But what matters is that stack from a very early stage to ultimately larger private equity type vehicles. And that early stage is what's missing. So I agree with you, but I don't think that anything should be placed at the foot of the larger investors necessarily. We need to build new things, and we need to encourage more groups like Prospero, who are focusing at an earlier stage of ventures. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So I think you make very valid points. And I think even in the work that we've been doing, obviously a lot of the work that we're doing around impact investment was originally focused on those growth stage businesses. And yes, we recognize a lot of those things that you said. It was hard to find enough deals that were ready to go to impact investors. So actually recently, one of the things that we've done and helped support through a partnership with Mentor Me and Bongo Hive and the African Business Angels Network is actually the formation of the Zambia Business Angels Network. And that really is targeting earlier stage businesses that need the type of support that you're talking about, where we are saying locally high net worth individuals can actually make those type of investments, right? And actually give that hand-holding support. Yes, it's only one organization, but I think it's a good start, and we need many more. And that's the point that I agree with you 100%. We need many, many more so that we can begin to build businesses from the base going upwards. And by the time that there are big investments or big challenge funds that require all those criteria that you mentioned, they're actually businesses, local Zambian businesses that are ready to take those up. So there's a lot of work to be done, and that I agree with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, William. If there are no more questions from the audience, I would like to again thank the panelists for joining us today and sharing insights, taking time out of their schedules to join us today. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody as well who joined to watch the session.